My name is James Simmons. I use he, him pronouns, and I am the Deputy Press Secretary with Progress Iowa. And welcome to the Council Bluffs People's Condition of the State event. We are here today to speak up for what Iowans need to take care of our communities. This is one of 7 events we are holding across the state. And before we get any farther, I'd like to thank our partner organizations and co-hosts for this event, the AFSCME Council 61, APWU Iowa, Healthcare for America Now Iowa, the Interfaith Alliance of Iowa, Iowa Citizen Action Network, Iowa Main Streets and Country Roads, Lower Drug Prices Now Iowa, Progress Iowa, and Tax March Iowa. I'd like to thank you all so much, all these organizations, for helping us get together and host these events across the state so where Iowans can stand up and let the governor and let our legislators know what we want to be prioritized for the upcoming session. As a reminder to everyone, this event is being recorded. So with no further ado, I will turn this over to Jen Pellant, a field coordinator, with the Western Iowa Labor Federation and the AFL-CIO. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, James. Thanks for that introduction. My name is Jen Pellant, and I do work for the Western Iowa Labor Federation. I am based out of Council Bluffs, but I work with working folks across 37 counties in Western Iowa. And if I didn't know before, I would certainly know now that the needs of working families in Iowa have been ignored over recent years. Wages are too low to make ends meet. Access to healthcare is out of reach for too many Iowans, and our education system is lacking the resources it needs to prepare our next generation. Working families need quality, good paying jobs with good benefits. And so we're here today together to stand up to Governor Reynolds and the Republican-led legislature, because we know Iowa can do better for working families, and we're here to hold them accountable so that we can all have a brighter future. As we prepare for the Iowa legislative session to open this Monday, we just wanted to get together and talk about how it's really going for working families in this state. Increasingly, there's a real disconnect between the rhetoric coming out of the governor's office and the legislature and how we feel and what we know to be true through our own lived experience. So we're here today to address that disconnect and talk about how we're really doing out here in Southwest Iowa. And to share their perspectives, I have with me some great friends and Council Bluffs residents from different walks of life. We're going to hear from Representative Charlie McConkey, City Council member and retired firefighter Steve Gorman, Council Bluffs Community School District Board member Jill Shudak, and small business owner Shawna Anderson, in that order. So to kick us off, we have our Iowa House Representative for District 15, Representative Charlie McConkey. Representative McConkey is serving his 4th term in the Iowa House this year and comes from a labor background. So he's able to share his perspective on legislative issues and working families from a firsthand perspective on both counts. And so Representative McConkey, please take it away. Tell us how you see it going for working families.
Well, thank you, Jill. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, and thank you for having me. You know, I first want to talk about how Governor Reynolds has failed us by having the fewest Iowans working today than she did 10 years ago when she took office. As Iowans, we understand the value of hard work and what a good paying job can do for our families and helps Iowa grow. Yeah, I just want to point out here's what's been happening. The Governor Reynolds and Republican leadership have blocked wage increases, sided with corporations that don't want to pay a livable wage. Instead of investing in working families, they introduced legislation that cut unemployment benefits during the pandemic. And they ignored legislation proposed that I co-sponsored or proposed by Democrats, like House File 617, that provides tax credit to small businesses to help them provide childcare for their employees, for the parents can go to work and not have to worry that their kids are safe. And House File 668 that ends the cliff effect on the child care assistance. It makes it possible for parents to take a small wage increase or promotion without losing all of their tax credits available to them. These are just simple things that we know Iowans want and are so they care about working and taking care of their families. We want leaders to do what's right things, and we want leaders to listen to us. We want leaders to get rid of what I call the road swap. It's a bill passed that allows contractors to bypass federal wage requirements so the state and federal projects. It also lets them buy cheaper and low-grade quality foreign materials over American-made materials like the Chinese steel. Here's why we need to give tax credits to any company that's paying a livable wage and provide grants to rehab our state housing stock so we can provide safe, clean, and affordable housing. These are just a few of the things, a few of the problems that we face, and I think that they should be our top priority. I'd say, Jen, I'll turn it over to you for, I don't want to, there's 1,000 other things I could tell you about what's going on, and I don't have a crystal ball of what to expect this next legislative session is going to look like, but we got a good ideas. I'm sure somebody's going to have some questions, so I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Charlie. Thank you for not just talking about what they haven't done, but really giving us concrete examples of what would be possible if we had people in the legislature and in government who were focused on making life easier for working families, who were focused on providing childcare and providing or ending the cliff effect and things like that. I mean, you've written that legislation. It's sitting right there. If they cared to pass it and they really wanted to do more than pay lip service to these things, that's available. So thank you so much for punching that up and talking about that today.
You're welcome.
Next, we have our newly elected City Council member, Steve Gorman. Steve is a lifelong resident of Council Bluffs who just retired from 30 years of public service as a Council Bluffs firefighter. He has carried union cards from both the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers and the International Association of Firefighters. He's a true friend of labor and a delegate to the Western Iowa Labor Federation himself. So, Steve, love to hear your perspective on what Iowans like you need.
Thank you, Jen. Progress Iowa and James, thank you for having me today. It's a real honor. I would like to state first of all here that I am newly elected to the Council Bluffs City Council, and today's views, I'm sharing our personal views and views that I think are important going in. I don't want to set myself or the council in a position that could do them harm. So that being said, a little about myself. I was, like Jen introduced me, I'm a lifelong resident of Council Bluffs. I'm a fourth generation Council Bluffs kid, and I ran in this last election cycle by getting out on doorsteps, talking to people, and being the Council Bluffs kid that I am and what I came from. I spent 30 years in the fire service and public safety. My wife taught 33 years, who's retired Council Bluffs teacher here in the state of Iowa. And now that she's gone back to work because of the state of our healthcare systems, she had to go back to work because I lost my insurance the day that I retired. And so she's now working with Family Inc., helping other families and kids find a pathway to insurance within the state of Iowa. And I got to thank her for that. She's a wonderful person. A little bit about my history. At the end of my 30 years career, I had a neck injury that fell into workman's compensation in the state of Iowa, which eventually ended my career. And so it set me on a new path forward where I ran for city council. Was actually able to be the top vote earner in that election cycle. And we talked about important issues such as what we're going to be talking about today. I look forward to working with our state government. Charlie McConkey, he's a great representative. Our representatives Brent Segrist and Dan Dawson. We have to work together, and we're going to do what's best for the city of Council Bluffs and for our community, because everything, I believe, comes back to local. But like I say, I experienced firsthand the damaging effects of the legislation that has come forward over the last few years. First of all, my wife was a 33-year school teacher that ended her career basically because of the loss of Chapter 20 and collective bargaining in the state of Iowa. It's really damaged the ability of teachers to have say in this last few years, and to help our governor and our government to get kids back into the classroom. Because when you're able to sit down and talk about the real safety issues and have input coming from the front lines, that helps open the doors to the necessary things that need to be done going forward. Iowa right now has got a bleeding artery of teachers leaving the state or leaving the profession of teaching, and it's damaging to our kids. And that's our next resources that are going forward. Personally, like I said, I hurt my neck at a fire, fell into the new and current limitations that have been put forward in workman's compensation. Made it very difficult for me to choose doctors, make appointments. They put into my life a caseworker that went to doctor's appointments with me like I was a child. And eventually they stretched out my physical therapy to where I couldn't get into the physical therapist specialist that I needed. And then I was retired out, and I still haven't met that goal. And so those are the things that happen under the new legislation of cutting benefits to working families out there. Our family needed our insurance, and the day I retired, after 30 years of work in the service, I had no insurance, and that truly affected us. Locally, we have a lot of good things happening in Council Bluffs. I see Council Bluffs as an opportunity to really do some good things in the upcoming years, but it's going to take all of us working together. And I'm going to be leaning on Charlie and our legislators up there in Des Moines to bring back to this community, one of the poorest socioeconomic communities in the state of Iowa, jobs that are going to be beneficial to families right here in the Council Bluffs and the infrastructure that we so desperately need. I ran on infrastructure. I talked about infrastructure every day out on the campaign trail, and I talked about the wages and the working families of how they're working 2 or 3 jobs just to get through the month in the city of Council Bluffs. And so wages and working conditions and working families is always at the front of the table when I'm sitting at the table talking with the leaders of this community. So at that, I'm going to turn it back over to Jen, and hopefully I'll get some questions that I can answer, and we'll have a good conversation today so we can move Iowa back into a progressive state. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Your personal experience with so many of these these laws that have actually made it harder for folks who get injured on the job, made it harder for our teachers to feel heard in the workplace, etc. It's so valuable to hear that firsthand from somebody like you. So thank you for participating today.
Thank you.
And next we have my friend Jill Shudak, who is a Council Bluffs Community School District Board member. She was first elected to our local school board in 2019, running on a platform to make Council Bluffs a better place to work, live, and learn. And in her role on the board, she's been an advocate for all the folks who work for the Council Bluffs Community School District, which is one of our community's largest employers. And she's had a huge impact on the board in terms of transparency and accessibility. She really keeps those lines of communication open. So we thank her for that. And I thank her for being here today to talk about education specifically. So Jill, take it away.
Thanks, Jen, for the great introduction. As Jen mentioned, my name is Jill Shudak. I am a current member of the Council Bluffs Community Board of Education. I'm in the middle of my first term. It's a 4-year term, so third year, going into my third year here of a 4-year term. And I'm like Steve, I'm here to speak as an individual, not as the board. But want to just talk through some of the priorities that the board did vote and approve on back in September 14th of this past year. Each year the board comes together, we discuss what our top priorities are to go and up to the Capitol and to lobby for and things of that nature. And coincidentally enough, they were actually just published in the local newspaper here earlier this month with the start of the session coming up. Not only ours, but also the other local school district here in Council Bluffs, Lewis Central. So we have 5 priorities that we really focused on this year that we want to go up to the Capitol on. 3 of them are really tied together. And that's about funding, right? We've seen year after year, the funding just not be there to keep our public schools going. So looking for our number 1 priority, timely, equitable, adequate funding for the schools. It seems that each year that the budget for education, in the overall budget, right, kind of gets pushed back further and further and further. And then that hurts the planning and the development in everything that we need to do as a district. Also not being fully funded, right? With inflation, things of that nature, we should be looking at getting, 5.5%, 6%, if not more each year in public funding. And we're getting like 3. So right out the bat, out of the gate, we're not being fully funded. Another one of our priorities, and these are in no particular order, but it's the student opportunity equality, right? So getting the resources necessary to close our achievement gap, and making sure that we have that additional information or just additional funding. I think right now there is a misconception that we've received all the districts across, the state and in the country have received all this federal money. And so, everybody's fully funded. That's limited, and that's only for a limited time, right? So those ESSER dollars have to be used within 3 years, and that funding goes away. So if we're not being fully funded by the state, and we know that the extra money that everybody says we have is going to be limited and is going to be going away, it's kind of setting ourselves up, down the road very quickly for that funding to not be there, and for us to be in more problems there. And then another one that goes along with funding then is fully funding preschool, pre-K, right? We have learned throughout this pandemic how important it is for education. We've also learned that the earlier that we can get children into public schools, pre-K, the more, the less it costs in our society down the road, right? It ties to kind of graduation rate. The sooner we can get kids in, get them learning, get them on that path, the more successful they are, and then that'll help our communities. I think something that I didn't necessarily know prior to becoming a board member is that pre-K is not funded the same way that regular K through 12 is. So K through 12, you get a certain number of dollars per each student, and that funding changes yearly. For pre-K, you get half of the funding. So it's 0.5 of what a normal student would get. And so the Council Bluffs Community School District is opening an early learning education center. We're very excited for that to be coming to our community here. We'll be breaking ground this year. So for 2022, 2023, hopefully being able to have that around the 2023, sorry, I believe is when our first class will be, but not to have that fully funding. That's, we're going to have to take resources from other things down the road. Now we have enough money raised in order to fund for a few years, but that's something I think across the state as more pre-K early learning centers come up, that's something that the state government's really going to need to look at, is fully funding that pre-K. Our third priority, I think really was motivated. It was something that we as a board knew we needed to prioritize, but definitely with the pandemic really put a focus on, and that's mental health services, right? So I think we can all agree across the board it's something that we need, but teachers are being asked to do more and more and more things. And providing mental health services is just one of those things that we can't add on, right? We need to have that funding to be able to bring in professionals, to be able to help not only our students, but also our employees. And so COVID has really shown a spotlight there for the need for mental health service funding. And then finally, and again, no particular order, because personally, I think this is, if not the number one, then definitely the second thing that needs to be a priority is getting local control back. Governor Reynolds tied everybody's hands with not being able to do things. And I'm not saying one way or another, there's just no say that we have. So as a board, we can't come together and look at what's going on in our community and make a decision right for our community. She took that local control away from us. Every community is different. Every community is seeing different positivity rates. They're seeing different spikes, ebbs and flows. And to not even have the ability to come together as a board, I think that's really, it's a sad and slippery slope that we're going down to. As an Iowan, personally, I believe in our local governments. I believe in our city councils. I believe in our school boards. And so for us to not even have the opportunity to come in the middle of a pandemic, because that's what she wanted, she doesn't know what happens in Council Bluffs. She doesn't know what happens in Red Oak. She doesn't know what happens in, Iowa City, all across the state. She knows what's happened in her area, in her community. And to me, again, personally, not from the board, the way how she's not been fully funding public education and then taking local control away, it feels like she has a war out on public education. So those were our priorities as a board, those 5 priorities. And again, happy to answer what questions I can, knowing that I am a little bit limited and only can speak from personal experiences.
Awesome. Thank you, Jill. That was, I really learned something from that presentation, like super informative about the way that funding is done and what's going on with education funding. Obviously, coming from a family of teachers, like that's a huge issue to me. And I've known for a while that the state has been underfunding. The interesting thing about your last point about local control too, to me, the story of Governor Reynolds' administration has been one of both underperformance and overreach. She overreaches into taking away local control where things like school boards are concerned, local localities that have tried to raise the minimum wage, things like that. But when it comes to funding our schools and stuff, she's far underperforming what the needs are. And it's mind-boggling to me that she's constantly bragging about this humongous budget surplus when we have all these funding deficits statewide that, folks who really actually need that money, and our schools are of course at the top of that list. So thanks for talking in detail about that, because I think it's really, really important. And last but certainly not least, we have Shawna Anderson. Shawna is the owner of a hair salon here in town called Salon Ecstasy. She has owned that successful business since 2009 and is a huge and important part of our business community. She also ran for the Iowa House of Representatives in 2020 in a hard-fought campaign to remove Representative John Jacobson from the House, a feat which I think to all of our benefit will be accomplished by redistricting in 2022. At least that's the hope. So, Shawna, thank you for being here to speak on behalf of business owners, and please let us know how it's going.
Okay, yeah. Thank you so much, Jen. I am super glad to be here. I'd love to tell you all the Jacobson stuff, but I am here as a business owner for Council Bluffs. As Jen said, my name is Shawna Anderson. I own Salon Ecstasy. We are down by Baumgars, and we've been there for about 12 and a half years. We opened June of 2009. So I, as a business owner, will hear Reynolds and our legislature go on and on about how they care about small businesses and they care about Iowa economy. And meanwhile, I truthfully feel like we are our smaller businesses, such as my business and a lot of the other smaller businesses, mostly in Council Bluffs that I frequent. I feel like we are left out of that. I think what she really likes are the big corporations that donate hundreds of thousands of dollars to her campaign. The rest of us are just chump change as far as she's concerned, and that's not really what she seems to care about. So as I've said, we've been in business for a little over 12 years. And in that time, my costs have risen at least by 30%. And I'm talking like, the cost of the product that I use on my clients, such as my color or, my rent, my heating bill. Actually, my trash collection of all things has literally doubled since 2009. I don't understand why trash is so expensive. But I have been very reserved when it comes to raising my prices to reflect that. It is very hard. And, we've had a few price increases through the years, but it's very hard knowing that my clientele, in the 12 years we've been in business, Iowa's minimum wage has been $7.25 an hour. And that hasn't changed the entire time I have been in business. So even if my clients aren't making minimum wage, their wages still aren't growing with the price of all their bills, just as my wages aren't growing. So there's a very thin line in business of being able to keep your customers in the door and being able to keep the doors open. And that fine line is raising your prices enough to be able to stay open and scrape by, and also keeping your prices low enough to keep your customer base. Because if my customers can't afford me, I don't have customers anymore. So what's really sad is in the 12 years we've been in business, especially in about the last 5 years, what I bring home at the end of the day has gone down tremendously because of my out-of-pocket costs and not being able to have that reflect in my prices, because people in Iowa, their wages aren't rising. Their gallons of gas are rising, their gallons of milk are rising, their price of bread is rising, but their student loans are rising, but their wages aren't compensating them for that. So therefore my wages are stuck as well, unfortunately. And that has definitely made it very hard, because for whatever reason, Reynolds and our legislature don't see the need in raising a minimum wage in Iowa, which would truthfully help all Iowans. As far as like the pandemic goes, that has been a really great time for us. And now I'm losing where I just wrote my notes here, but this week alone, I have had 8 clients cancel. All 8 have COVID. 2 of those were kids' haircuts. The other 2 were adult haircuts. 1 was a perm and 2 were colors. So just in this week alone, and I did the math, let me see, I lost $358 this week. So that's $358 that I won't be putting towards my rent, electric, all those bills. That's $358 that I won't go buy my little sugar makery popcorn addiction with, which is another small business here in Council Bluffs. I won't be spending that money in the community. And I keep hearing Governor Reynolds talk about the economy and, providing for these small businesses. Well, when we're losing money because COVID isn't being mitigated, you're not doing anything for the economy. Like, I am the economy. These small businesses, that's what we are. We are the Iowa economy, and we're losing money because this COVID is spreading so much that we're not making the money we would normally make. And you can also put that in with that $358 loss of income for me. That lost the state $22. No, that doesn't sound like a lot, but that's $22.07 from one person in one business in 1 week. How much are we losing for? I have 4 other stylists in my salon. So how much altogether have we lost? How much money are we losing in tax revenue because she is not doing anything to mitigate COVID at all. And in the process, I am coming home, losing my voice a little bit today and getting a nice little runny nose, no matter what I'm doing with my hopefully not counterfeit KN95 mask, doing the best that I can because I touch people for a living, to hopefully not be catching COVID myself and also losing more income there. And another issue that we have seen, especially over the last few years in the salon, is two of my coworkers have school-age children, and childcare has become practically non-existent, especially the after-school care. You know, they're both in that point in their careers and their kids' lives where they are like excited because they're school age now. So they're at school during the day, but then what do you do with them afterwards? You know, in a salon business, we're in the business of being there when everybody else is off of work. So we work later nights, we work weekends. You know, today I rushed home after work and hopefully don't still have my nice mask lines across my face. You know, we work when everybody else doesn't. So it is extremely hard to find childcare. And there's, you know, Charlie's talking about trying to write bills into law that would help these moms access childcare to make their work lives easier. And for whatever reason, our GOP legislature and Kim Reynolds just don't see that as a priority. Meanwhile, talking out the other side of their mouth about the importance of the economy and getting Iowans back to work. So I am very proud to have been in business in Council Bluffs in 12 years. I love being a part of the community, and I love the way that my family has grown for all of my customers over the years. And you know, I personally am very hopeful that come 2022, we will have people that act such as for a lot of years to come.
Thank you, Shawna. Thanks for talking about all that. I think we also got to see a couple of issues with rural broadband while you were on there. We just had a couple of little freezes, but
I'm sorry, I didn't even notice. I'm sorry.
That's life in rural Iowa, but no,
it is.
We definitely got the gist of what you were saying, and it's super important to hear that perspective. I agree with you. I think sometimes when I hear her talk about how supportive she is of small businesses, I think, does she think Tyson is a small business? Does she think John Deere is a small business? Because those are the only companies that I see her. Those are the size companies that I see her actively supporting. Maybe Principal Financial, maybe Tyson, etc. But she's certainly not on the side of workers. You know, the UAW workers had to strike John Deere this year for fair wages and benefits, and she wasn't on their side. Workers at the meatpacking plants got sick and died during COVID. She certainly wasn't on their side. So I don't know what she's talking about. And then, you know, as we all know, sometimes you want to go to your favorite small town restaurant and you drive up and there's a for lease sign in the window. I mean, businesses, I think over 700 restaurants went out of business during the pandemic, and we never hear her talk about that. So thank you for bringing that perspective. And those are all of our speakers. So if I want to kick it back to James and see if you have any questions that you want to put to the group, that'd be great.
Awesome. Seriously, thank you to all of our speakers today and to everyone joining. All of you speakers were amazing, incredible. I learned so much, and all of Iowans appreciate you standing up and using your voice to call on the legislature, to call on the Republican-led legislature to actually use their power to help Iowans. We shouldn't be struggling through this pandemic individually. We should be coming together as a state under unified, empathetic leadership that will lead us to a more progressive future. So I would like to thank our partners one more time really quick. Ask Me Council 61, APWU Iowa, Healthcare for America Now Iowa, Interfaith Alliance of Iowa, Iowa Citizen Action Network, Iowa Main Streets and Country Roads, Lower Drug Prices Now Iowa, Progress Iowa, and Tax March Iowa. And I'm going to turn this over and see if we have any questions from our participants. You can send them into the chat and we will put those out to our speakers. I'm going to steal a line from one of our organizers, Amy, but I also used to be in the classroom, and so I have a really good wait time for questions. All right, we have one question for our speakers. I'm going to put this out to anybody who would like to answer it, but what can everyday Iowans do to stand up and raise their voices and take action so we can see our priorities represented at the legislative, at the gubernatorial level?
Yeah, thank you, James. That was a great question. And being a state legislature, I see that the majority of Iowans aren't speaking up. It's a minority that's taken over and running our government. I'm asking everybody to speak up, and like I get people in my district contact me and thank me for the good job I'm doing, and I need them to reach out to all the other legislators and let them know what they think they're doing, and let them know how they feel. Because I don't know how many times legislator gets on the floor and says, I've heard this is what I'm getting. And I know he isn't getting that, because I'm getting just the opposite. And believe me, I hear from people all over the state. And I help people from all over the state that needs help. And I feel that's my job. Any Iowans has a problem, they can come to me and I can see what I can do for them. But good question. I don't want take up all the time. If anybody else has anything to say on that, and I'll let them speak.
I agree.
I would really like to say really specifically, we used to have legislative coffees in Council Bluffs that people could participate in, and that was a way to directly speak to your legislatures and ask them questions. I have made it, I have talked to the Chamber of Commerce and I have made my feelings clear about that. They moved those to noon on Fridays on Zoom during the pandemic, which of course is really inaccessible for teachers and other folks who work not necessarily sitting at a desk all day. So mostly it eliminates working folks in the community and education professionals. So I would like, if everybody on this call wants to reach out to the Chamber of Commerce, reach out to their legislators and say that we want these open forums where we can talk to them. And if they have to be virtual for safety reasons, they can still be virtual and accessible. They can still be at a time when more people can make it. Like I said, they used to be at like 8 or 9 o'clock, I think, on Saturday mornings. And for some reason during the pandemic, they moved them to noon on Fridays, which is just ridiculous. The only people who can make it are the members of the chamber who are sitting at their desks all day long. And then the other thing that I want to specifically encourage people to do is to attend your caucus in February. Upcoming on Monday, February 7th are the caucuses. And it's really important for working folks to get involved in those, to become delegates to their county party and to carry those issues forward, all the way to the State House. So those are two asks that I have personally for everybody.
I'd like to also say, one of the things that really urged me into getting involved in politics, and I didn't really know how to get started, but I started right in my own neighborhood. I believe that all politics is local. And we had issues in my immediate neighborhood that wasn't being addressed by the city. And so we organized into a neighborhood association and I started my activities of growing out from there. And there's so many different ways you can get involved. You can't solve the problem sitting at the kitchen table. You have to get out and you have to talk to your neighbors. You have to show up at the city council meetings, the school board meetings, and you have to get out when it's time and get behind the people that are in line with your issues and work for them. And that's the way we're going to get our country back and our state back and our community in line with what is necessary. So I really encourage people. It's a good time. You don't realize how connected you are once you step out and start talking to people, to all the way up through our government. It's ours. It truly is. And we need to take it back. Thank you.
I'll add to that. I agree with everything that's said, but I think sometimes I'm a little shocked that some people don't even know who their local, who their representative is, right? At the state level. So doing those simple things. I'm lucky enough to call Charlie a friend. So if I have a question about what's going on, I go directly to him. But you got to know that our senators, our congresspeople, they represent us as a community. So don't feel like you can't reach out. Same thing with city council and school board, right? Jen mentioned, I think one of the things I do is I post the agenda. Very simple. You have a question, let me know about it. But reach out and be involved. Also, if there's a bill that's coming up that you're not in for, or you heard something that's going on, find out who's on that committee. Reach out directly to those people. Just because they're not your representative, they still represent the state of Iowa. So reach out directly to those people. And that goes to what Charlie says. If they're only hearing from their little pocket of supporters, they don't know how everybody else is feeling. So feel free to reach out across the state. It doesn't necessarily need to be your representative or your state senator. Reach out to anybody who's on that committee and let your voice be heard.
Awesome. Thank you all for speaking on that question and giving so much awesome insight to what Iowans can do to take action. We have one follow-up question. How can people find out where their local caucus is and sign up to attend that?
So I'll speak just briefly. This is based out of Council Bluffs, right? So this is Pottawatomie County Democrats. So you can go to the Facebook page, you can go to our Twitter page. Steve, I'll let you continue since you're the leadership there.
Yes, our caucuses are going to be held in February, Monday, February 7th. We're going to be holding our caucus in two buildings, one in Oakland, Iowa called, it's the old high school up there. We have that, and we're going to be at Curran School. That information will be publicized in the newspaper for one, and it'll also be put out through our emails and through our Pottawatomie County webpage. And so I look forward. I believe also we're going to be mailing out letters to our delegates from our last caucuses. And so you'll be hearing real shortly where to go, what time they are. They'll be from, the buildings are going to be open at 6. We'll close the door to the caucusing at 7 and then do our caucusing in both those venues. So I look forward to seeing you. And like I say, it's an opportunity to get involved and to build our platform going forward for the state of Iowa and our federal government. So it's an opportunity to get in there and have your say. Thank you.
Thanks
I
so
will
much.
say, sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
The building in Oakland that Steve was referring to is called Impact Hill now, is the old high school, being a resident of Oakland. And also, if you are curious about how to find your caucus site, the ACLU has a wonderful way to find it. If you just go to aclu-ia.org, you can just type in your information and it'll tell you where your caucus site is at.
Awesome. So we've got a couple different sources we can find that information at. Thank you all for sharing that. And once again, I want to thank our speakers for coming in today and joining us. Everyone, thank you for joining us on a Saturday afternoon to hear from your leaders and from Iowans just like you. We can come together and we can demand that our legislature does work for us. We saw a lot of great years. This is a little bit before my time, but under Vilsack and under Chet Culver, and we can see Iowa succeed. We can make Iowa a place again where we lead in civil rights, where we lead in quality of life, and where we lead with pride for having a state that is inclusive, accessible, and progressive enough to accept everyone for who they are. Thank you everyone for joining us. This will be posted onto our YouTube as well as our social media. You can follow us at Progress Iowa. If there's any members of the press on the call today, feel free to reach out to me at james@progressiowa.org. With respect to everyone's time, thank you so much and have a great rest of your weekend.